The largest unsolved problem in VR.
In 1995, Keanu Reeves starred in a dystopian science fiction film all about virtual reality. And you may be thinking The Matrix, but that came later. The first VR film for Reeves.
It's crazy when I grew up watching The Matrix. I thought the first film was boring, and then the two sequels were like amazing. I think I was like literally 12 years old though. But going back now, like it's still like fun, but they're not good films.
Reeves was actually Johnny
The original is like cinema though.
Mnemonic, a film that ended up being a box office flop and is subjectively pretty terrible. But there's one scene that I have always absolutely loved. In order to hack into a database, Johnny dons a full VR rig to navigate through cyberspace, breaking through security and even threatening to crash another user.
I could crash you from here, man.
And I love this scene so much because it's one of the first ever 3D representations.
I keep seeing this meme online that Keanu Reeves can't act. He's like Nicolas Cage where he can't act. I think he can. I think he can act. Like he's proven himself in John Wick, even though John Wick is more of like his physical performance than his actual acting. But yeah, like watching him in like Bill and Ted and stuff is so good. I'm gonna hack you, bro. Like I remember like in The Matrix, there's a bit where Morpheus jumps over to the other side of the building to show Neo how powerful you can be. And Neo just goes, whoa.
Of what a virtual reality user interface could possibly look like. Gloves, a headset, gestures, typing. This film shows just how wild the possibilities are. And now, 30 years later, almost none of this is science fiction. We have the internet, gloves, hand tracking, VR headsets, but the user interfaces of these devices still look like this. And to this day, these interfaces are universally the most criticized elements of modern virtual reality. And so
there's actually one thing. I still have my VR kit sat over here. Hang on. I still got all of this sat over here, like my Valve Index. This is like all the wires and stuff. Like I still haven't set it up. I still haven't set it up like since I moved house. There's the, you know, but like one thing I notice is the headset, I can't wear it for more than like a few hours because I don't get like motion sickness, but it's just so heavy. It's so bulky. And I think, hang on. There's a guy I talked to who is a furry, because of course he's a furry. And there's actually a VR kit that they've done that it's not a VR kit. It's just glasses. Because if you look at the, hang on. If you look at the Valve Index, because I'm guessing the Valve Index right now is still the best VR kit you can get power-wise. But that headset is enormous, bro. It sucks. But I saw this. He linked me this. Look how small that is. So that all you need to do is just hook it up to your Index, and it works normally. Like that's really good. It is dead tiny. Like look at that. Like I would, if I had like goggles that small, I'd be playing VR all day. I would actually be playing VR all day. But then, what's the price? Isn't it like 4K? Oh, it's 1K. I mean, that's still mad expensive for goggles. And there's no audio, by the way. There's no audio. You got to get like... You have to get your own audio kit. The Index is fire. I still think it's the most powerful system, right?
So I decided to embark on a journey to explore the wild world of VR interfaces. Why are they designed the way they are?
Your avatar would be planet-sized. I've literally already commissioned that in VR chat, but yeah. Like, I commissioned so many VR chat models and I just never ended up using VR chat. Like it was the biggest money sink imaginable.
Why do they not look like this? Why are they so frustrating? And what can we do better? But in order to talk about VR design this deeply, you need to see the world.
It's not the most powerful. What's the most powerful VR kit?
From the perspective of it.
Did you play Half-Life Alyx? Yeah, I played all of it. Very good game. I was going to do a main channel video on it, but then I kind of just never... I just never got around to it.
And so, that's where we're going to...
The Quest 3 is more powerful. Is it?
Start with the philosophical foundations of design.
There's 8K VR headsets. Damn. They got a bit like bespoke ones though, right?
You don't need a degree to understand design. You just need that perspective shift and a few key terms.
Part 1. Foundations of Design.
50.
Why do you use Microsoft, Sam?
Years ago, Don Norman released 2 books that have practically become known as the Bible of design: The Design of Everyday Things and Emotional Design. And while they talk of many things, the core messages can be shrunk down into a few main principles with a golden rule. And the first of those concepts is probably the most popular one. Good design is invisible. Try and think of the last time you had a great user interface or design experience. Now, try and think of all the times you've had a bad experience.
Well, you only really notice good design, like interface, when you're comparing it to something updated. Like I remember as a kid, like I'd have like a DS, and then I moved on to like a bigger DS or like a bigger phone. And then you think like, oh my God, this phone is so much better. And then when you go back to the old phone, you actually can't use it. It just feels like you're using like a paperweight or something.
It's much easier to point out when something feels wrong or bad than it is to pinpoint why something feels good. And I think we're all familiar with the bad examples. From accidentally suggestive signs to washing machines needing a key chart to operate. The worst one for me are doors. I am notoriously terrible with doors of all types. And I can list bad examples all day long, but I know I can't do the same with good examples. And that's the bittersweet nature of good design. It's invisible. The next set of concepts may sound a little more complicated, but it's actually really simple when you break it down. There are basically 3 all-encompassing principles that design abides by. It's a way to deconstruct why things don't work, and
I like smaller phones. I think we're reaching the point where phones aren't going to get any bigger. They're just going to get better, because it's like your hand doesn't get bigger. Like I've got the Samsung S24 Ultra. It's basically like Samsung's most expensive phone at the minute. And it's like it's too big. Like when I'm scrolling on TikTok and then I need to go back, like my thumb can't reach up there. I have to like 2-hand it and then do that. Like an old person, like you know, you get boomers on their phone and they just like do that. Phones are literally getting too big now. I think we're gonna stop seeing like large phones.
To construct things that do. First up are affordances. An affordance is the sum of all possible
I'm 6'3" and the 14 Pro Max is too big.
Interactions that a human can have with an object. The affordance of a door, for example, is the mechanical ability to swing 180 degrees. A door is afforded opening and closing. But how do you know which way the door swings? Is it a push or pull or sliding door? And this is where the second principle comes in: signifiers. A signifier communicates to people how they can interact with the affordances. A flat panel on a door signifies it's a push door. And in VR, for example, an object that is interactable may glow or highlight when you hover over it. That object's affordance is that it can be moved and interacted with. The signifier is the glow letting you know. And the final of these principles is feedback, the return of information to the user. A haptic buzz when you select something, a button's color changing, the click.
That's why the Index is like one of the best VR kits out there right now, because it actually has like a lot of VR stuff until recently couldn't really simulate. Your hand was just here, right? But then the Index actually simulates like every single finger on your hand because of the triggers. I'm sure more like VR stuff does that now, but like back when the Index came out, there was like I couldn't name a single one that actually did that.
Of a key press on a keyboard.
Yeah, finger tracking is actually game breaking. It's crazy. Like Half-Life Alyx, like being able to like poke stuff with your finger, it was so sick.
And when all of these things come together, you're able to systematically figure out how a person can interact with an object, when, where.
I would lose so much weight if I had a VR treadmill. You seen those VR things on Disney that Disney patented? It's like you walk on the spot and it purposely pushes you back so they can just like act on the spot.
And in which way that interaction can happen. And of course, a way to let people know that this interaction did happen. And I know this may all seem extremely obvious, but there's a reason why these basic principles are taught the way they are. Now, when things work or don't work as intended, it's easier to single out exactly why. Like a coffee mug with a hole too small to put your fingers into, or a game asking you to press a lettered button that you can't.
I just can't take it seriously when he says a game. Because Dolan has brain-rotted me with the meme that there's no games.
Can't see. Both are examples of bad or missing affordances. And this practice of applying these concepts not only leads to better designs, but can also literally save lives and prevent catastrophe.
It was the first step in a nuclear nightmare.
In 1979, the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant shut down after a partial meltdown. After the investigation, it was discovered that a single bad signifier almost led to complete nuclear disaster. On one of the control panels, a light was used to show whether a valve was open or closed. If the valve is open, the light is off.
Did you say utopia because it takes place in a nuclear reactor facility?
And once a button is pressed, the light goes on and the valve closes. The problem occurred when an operator pressed the button to close the valve as they do every day. The light switched on as it should, but the valve itself was actually stuck open. The light was signifying not whether the valve was actually open or closed like you'd expect, but instead the light reacted only to the button press itself, having no connection to the valve that the button controls. Disaster.
Do you get custom-made avatars for VR chat? I think I wouldn't be surprised if people commission them. No, I've literally commissioned like multiple VR chat models that I just never ended up using.
Could have been averted by simply signifying the right affordances and giving the right feedback.
Part 2. The design of today's things.
I find it pretty spectacular that you could travel back in time 17 years, buy an iPhone, and you'll be greeted with almost the exact same interface you are today. And if you were to travel 40 years in time...
God, I remember going to school and my mom just gave me like one of those, you know, those Nokia brick phones? I had like a blue one. And then I think my first actual touchscreen device was an iPod. Yeah, it was an iPod. It was like one of the 5th gens or 3rd gens, one of the ones with a touchscreen on it. You couldn't even make calls on it.
You could grab a Macintosh off a store shelf and be met with the same exact affordances, signifiers, and feedback that we have today. Files, folders, windows, and a desktop. These are all skeuomorphic symbols, which is another very important term for VR. Skeuomorphism is the practice of using digital design elements that mimic a physical object. The computer isn't actually full of folders, and your smartphone doesn't need to make a shutter noise. But these are all good design practices that take something complex or unfamiliar.
You know that shutter noise reminded me of? I forget where it is. It might be Korea or Japan. It's an Asian country. But they like, when you buy phones in this country, they have to have the shutter noise on by default. You cannot turn it off. Because people like taking pictures of like girls' skirts and stuff. It's Japan. Yeah, that's right. They had to purposely leave it on.
And uses symbols and signifiers to break down their affordances into something recognizable and intuitive. They're all essentially just analogies, connections that enable your brain to build what's called a conceptual model, which I think is one of the coolest things that the human brain does automatically. You see a thing, and without any direction, you can intuitively make a model in your mind of how something works, or at least should work. As a simple example, you don't need an instruction manual to operate a pair of scissors. There's only one place for your fingers, and it's not the pointy end. And it's designed to do one thing. A pair of scissors is a tool that cuts.
Remember how you always taught in school to hold scissors the proper way? You hold the blade in your hand, not by the actual handle. I don't know why. It's stuff like that that's just like ingrained into my head.
But what is a pair of scissors in a piece of software? There are no handles or cutting edges, but it's still a tool that cuts. And as human culture evolves, we design ever more complex things to be intuitive by relating them to things of the past. Shutter sounds, desktops, documents, folders, trash bins, scissors. And when you look at it, the last 50 years of design and user interfaces are really built upon centuries of physical things that we can all relate to without thinking. And that leads me to a really big question.
Damn, this is like one of those videos that you need to be like smoking weed for or something. Like one of those like philosophical videos. I mean, the cut tool still does have the pair of scissors as the icon.
Why have these interfaces stuck around for half a century? Why are we held back by physical constructs in the digital world? Why don't we have Johnny Mnemonic style cyberspace exploration? Is it allowed?
I don't think it's held back. I think it's just iconography. Like if you recognize something, it's like how people use like numbers and stuff like across different countries.
Lack of innovation? Is it just because this is what everyone's used to and no one dare change the formula? Or is it the inverse? Perhaps these technologies, smartphones, home PCs, the internet, have only proliferated as...
Holding scissors by the blade is stupid. How do I hold the knife by the blade? Because the knife is etched. Like you cut yourself on it. When you hold scissors, both sides are dull. Like it's not dangerous at all. If you fell over when holding a pair of scissors, you could like stab yourself on accident. If you're holding it by the blade, what's it going to do? Like just like, oh, a bit of plastic went in my head.
as far into the human condition as they have because of the interfaces, because of good design. I mean, computers existed before the GUI, smartphones and feature phones and PDAs existed before the iPhone, but the explosion point, the moment where everything accelerated, smartphone wars, cheaper devices, and worldwide adoption, didn't happen until a design good enough allowed humans to interface with technology in a way that makes sense. And I'd argue that the answer to that big question is 100% because it's just what everyone's used to, but it's also 100% because of incredible design that we have ever been able to become used to it at all.
Part 3. The VR Design Paradox.
There have certainly been some
My ruffle cup that goes swah, 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 swah.
interesting shakeups and ideas thrown out recently, especially with artificial intelligence and things like the humane AI pin.
Yeah, that pin was actual ass though. That was so awful.
But they're as far away from being viable today as VR was in 2012. The technology is interesting, but the human interface has a long way to go. A story that
I feel like Mark Ass Brownlee should be holding his palm out like flat though, not like curving it.
may sound very familiar to VR itself. Virtual reality is an inherently interesting technology that I don't think we figured out how to
Who started Oculus again? Wasn't it John Carmack that like helped make Doom?
interface with yet. And Johnny Mnemonic is such an interesting case point because it displays the concept that anything is possible in this medium. You can do anything from floating panels to skeuomorphic spatial trash bins to delete files to navigating the internet like you're flying through Rez.
Dude, Rez is such a classic game. I really hope people in this chat, at least some of you, actually experienced Rez.
Hi Pyro.
It's so good.
Wanted to thank you for your content. All of your videos make my days better, and I always know even if I've had a bad day I have something interesting or silly to watch. Thank you. Less than 3.
Thank you, Cade, for the 10. That's really nice of you. Appreciate it.
But that's almost
It wasn't a self-dono. It's like a nice dono, guys. Shut up.
overwhelming. And I think that's VR's first big design problem. VR itself is difficult to describe. It's hard to
Carmack joined during the original Kickstarter.
put it into words. And we've all heard the terms before. There's unlimited possibilities. You can be anywhere, anyone, do anything, infinite creativity. But infinity is an impossible concept to grasp. We're incapable of it as humans. And so instead, we resort to the hypothetical experience with the cliche, imagine you're on a
I do wonder when we'll get like a huge VR game, because Half-Life Alyx is probably the biggest budget VR game we've ever had. Because VR games, like they're pretty good, you know, like they're funny for like TikTok clips, but a lot of them are pretty superficial. I think The Walking Dead as well was also another good one. Saints and Sinners. Because like pretty much every single Walking Dead game that's came out, apart from Telltale, has just been like trash. So it was surprising to see like a non-Telltale Walking Dead game that was good.
beach watching the sunset, and within a blink, you're on the edge of a black hole in your virtual
I remember seeing people surviving 100 days in VR, and it was just a nightmare for them.
office, but you're actually there.
The issue is all the good VR games get bought into exclusivity by Oculus and PSVR. Yeah, I noticed that a lot of them come out on Oculus. I'm not buying an Oculus.
That's what VR is. But then you actually get a headset and get into VR, and you quickly realize that it's nothing like that. The promises of VR are so tall, essentially godhood of your own personal reality, but that's not the reality.
Oh yeah, that's literally the goggles I was showing off.
And the marketing doesn't reflect that. And if that's what you were expecting, you better have a really great imagination, or you're sorely and deeply disappointed, maybe even lied to. And so instead of thinking about VR in the impossibility of infinite place
Yeah, VR is still like a bit of a playtest, I think. Like most games are a little bit ass. I remember like Half-Life Alyx and being blown away by it. Like all the alcohol in the bottles, you could pick up bottles and like shake them around and you'd see the liquid move around. Like that wasn't real. That wasn't like simulations. That was just like really, really complex shaders they were using. But it still looks super cool.
Let's think for a moment about virtual reality strictly from a design perspective. In the physical world, design is extremely limited to mechanical affordances. A door can only open in the way a door was mechanically designed to do so. But the physical world is also heavily contextualized through signifiers and detail. A sign can be read at a glance. Details can be immediately interpreted because we have a very solid conceptual model of reality and physics. We know from a very young age how the world works, even if we don't know the math behind it. Which is also why computers and smartphones base everything on skeuomorphic symbols and analogies. We don't think like a computer, we think like humans, and humans live in reality alongside these devices. And those devices have their own physical constraints. An iPhone is afforded touch on the
Pyro,
entire screen.
Since when does soon mean 2 months?
Soon? I mean, 2 months is soon for a Pyro video.
There is no difference in functionality between these pixels and those pixels. Virtual reality, on the other hand, is legitimately fundamentally different from everything else. There is no mechanical constraint at all. There are no defined laws of physics. Affordance is an unlimited resource. Anything, anywhere can be used for any purpose. But the use of signifiers are deeply impacted. Signs are hard to read. Detail is limited to render.
I genuinely think in like 10 years from now, you're gonna have like an epidemic of like no one getting laid because they're all getting laid in like VR games and stuff. Like if you can create any fantasy you want inside like a VR game, you're genuinely gonna have like a generation of people that are just never gonna leave the house for any reason, and they're just gonna be living on VR.
Rendering power. And the biggest
Even people in chat are saying, "Wowie, I wish."
drawback is that the conceptual model
Not 10 years, 100 years? No, not 100 years. Have you seen how quick technology is like evolving? Hell no, not 100 years. Let's meet on 50. Let's meet on 50 years. Not 100 years. That's way too long. We'll
Hello,
be...
Pyro. I want to thank you for your content. It helps me to make harder decisions. Thanks to your video garbage, I took the decision to game end myself.
Don't do that.
Keep up the slop. You made me do this, Gooby.
A game-ending dono. 5 years? No, I think 5 years is too soon for stuff like that. Like, if we're talking like Ready Player One levels, I don't think that's going to be in 5 years.
we built from existing in physical reality and interacting with modern technology are prone to failure. From a philosophical point of view,
Pyro,
everything
you
within
should try out a game called World of Horror. It's a love mix game inspired by Junji Ito and Eldritch Horror. It's a roguelike game with multiple endings. Also, you should collab with Indymus.
Indie Mouse? I speak to him. He's I think he's got a voice in the Darkwood video. I speak to Indie Mouse like every couple of weeks or so. He's a really nice guy. Yeah, I've seen this. I haven't played it before though.
virtual reality is just a skeuomorphism of a different concept. A door in VR is not a physical door, obviously. It's a symbol of a passageway between one place to another. A button is not a button, and a pair of scissors is not a pair of scissors, but instead it's a tool that cuts. VR design at its core is the art of connection and analogy, using symbols and representation to do things that are not.
Now I'm drawing you getting beat up by Dolan and Uncle Ben to free a friend from the hole.
No, don't do that. Don't do that. I saw them in our group chat talking about that. And then I said to them, yeah, they like, Colossal and Jay literally were saying to me like, oh yeah, we're going to draw you get beat up to get, Bailey's drawing you getting beat up. And then I said to them, can I be drawn fat? And they said no. Don't do that, bro. That sucks. If I get out the maggot hole, you'll get a ban.
Not physically possible. And you may think, this is just game design. How is VR design any different? Well, even in the most immersive of flat first-person game design, you are always...
Would it be okay if you were fat? Yeah, it would.
Just
I'd actually consent to that then.
Just an outside observer. In virtual reality, you're instead an inhabitant, which is its own double-edged sword. I think one of the most frustrating and confusing parts is when a skeuomorphic object that we have a conceptual model for in the physical world doesn't line up with the virtual one. And we're left with the same frustrating problems that we deal with in the physical world, but now in the virtual. I can't open the damn door. And I think the core real problem here is that modern VR interfaces make people feel...
Oh yeah, typing in VR is actual hell. It is actual hell. It's one of the worst things imaginable.
feel stupid.
It is actually old person typing on their phone with the leather case.
It's frustrating. And even after tens of thousands of hours in VR, I have to constantly ask myself, is this bad or am I just bad? But this paradox of skill issue places us on the singular golden rule of design.
Is that when you're lying in bed, you got your smart TV, and then you need to sign into like Netflix or Apple TV, and you just need to manually put in every single character?
The rule that trumps all others. You can throw out affordances, signifiers, feedback, conceptual models. They're all just abstractions to help guide a design to follow.
Do I ever check my fan art on Discord? I check the fan art on my Discord every day. I just react with like emojis and stuff to all of it, just to show that I've seen it.
The golden rule. And it's that it is never the human's fault. We automatically blame ourselves for bad design. It's our nature. It has to be us. And while feeling stupid, we form a negative relationship with that design. We intuitively resist it because it makes us feel
What VR headset is that?
bad. And the golden rule exists to remind designers that the purpose of design is to build things that communicate with humans. Good design is good communication. And it makes me think of all the people that have walked away from a VR experience, definitely feeling a variety of emotions, some of it awe and wonder, but I guarantee that every single one of those experiences is also filled with quite a few negative emotions. And as we talked about earlier, the negatives weigh twice as much as the positive. So, what can we do about all this?
16K VR headset.
Part 4. The perfect VR operating system.
If there's one lesson Don Norman and my mother instilled in me, it's to never complain about something unless I have an alternative. And in this case, I do. I figured the best way to put all of this into practice is to conceptualize my dream interface. One that takes what we have today, shaves off as many frustrating pain points as possible, and allows people to enjoy VR because they're not thinking about VR. They're just doing it.
I wonder what the hardware specs are of the Apple Vision Pro. I bet it is so bad compared to like any VR headset.
5 core VR operating system philosophies, or principles that I think every OS should go by. And the first is a virtual operating system should respect the user's space, both virtual and physical. It should serve as an anchor.
Probably the same as the original Xbox. Yeah, probably even worse.
Or a bridge between worlds, but never as something
based YouTube alert.
And physical. It should serve.
Is he watching again? Oh yeah, Ordinary Things. Yeah, his videos are great. I love that guy.
As an
I really like Ordinary Things.
Anchor or a bridge between worlds, but never as something that gets in the way or takes attention without permission. The base core functions of any operating system.
Wait, one of the Pyro mods plays VR chat. That is the least surprising news I've heard in my life.
Should be a wristwatch or a hand menu that is always easily glanceable with basic information, but is never obtrusive unless there's intent. I can check the time, reply to a message, change quick settings, all without leaving the application that I'm in. And I actually find it especially disrespectful how Meta treats panels in VR. They stick to your face, obscure real-world objects. I mean, I can't even see the...
Is that most games feels like tech demos, especially on Steam VR
Yeah.
and Quest
Yeah,
Store.
they're very
If it
superficial.
wasn't for Blade and Sorcery, hot dogs, horseshoes and hand grenades, and especially chat with my kitten, my Quest 3 would be collecting dust.
Yeah, like I said, I got my VR kit, my Index, that's worth like over $1,000, just sat there rotting. Like I just don't have any reason to use it.
table I'm marking in mixed reality because a panel
I do want to get it set up again though.
follows me like a stalker everywhere I go. It's a nightmare to imagine ad pop-ups in VR or
Is this real? This looks so ugly.
panels that you can't get away from. So rule 1, respect people's space.
Thank you,
2,
Trojan, for the
all
gift.
core OS and menu level systems should be designed for hand tracking first and controllers second. This may sound controversial, but hand tracking when implemented well can be significantly simpler than controller navigation. The first instinct when designing a UI for a controller is to hide functions behind buttons, and in VR you can't even see those buttons. With a hands-first design philosophy, you don't have the option to hide functions behind buttons. And on top of that, it is way easier to add controller support to a hand-focused design than it is to ever add hand tracking support with gestures mapped to 12 different buttons. And if there's one thing that the Vision Pro taught me, it's that I do not want to use controllers unless I have to. In those cases, such as games, well, grab the controllers and get to slicing. But for every
Hand tracking is insane, especially gyro for aiming. Yeah.
moment up until that. I don't want to have
When they get the sensitivity perfect, like it clicks.
to hold things in
Like
my
I still remember using like the Colt pistol in Half-Life Alyx. It was so good.
hands. 3. Standardization.
I think one thing that they have a problem with VR as well is weight. Okay, hear me out. This is me talking about weight, okay? I just feel stuff doesn't have it because we can't do it, right? It's impossible. Stuff doesn't have weight. Like I remember in like Half-Life Alyx, you had the pistol and it felt perfect. But then when you got hold of like the SMG, even though it was this big bulky thing, you were still kind of just like one-handing it, just like moving it around and stuff. There wasn't. It's like VR and Skyrim. All you gotta do is like if you want to win any encounter in VR Skyrim, you just do that, and you'll instantly like hit them 20 times with the sword. He's talking about. No, I know I'm talking about weight. I know I'm talking about weight. I'm just saying.
The first 15 to 20 minutes of every single VR game is the exact same. You hop into the game and are immediately bombarded with the 20 questions of VR. Smooth turn or snap turn? Teleport or smooth locomotion?
I hated teleport in Alyx. I had to turn that off straight away and just move to like manual. Because using the crappy little joystick, which is like a Switch joystick, that sucked, but like teleporting around would be so lame.
Vignette or no vignette? Now, almost
Oh, yeah, the VR chat layout.
turn. Teleport or smooth locomotion? Vignette or no
That VR chat is awful. Like that menu interface is so bad.
vignette. Now, almost every VR user I've ever met already knows their preferences, and
Teleport movement sucks. It's more convenient. You're not relying on this like crappy little joystick, but still.
this is generally the same among most VR games. So, why isn't this figured
Like, why would you want to do teleportation in a VR game? The entire point of VR is virtual reality. You're not doing like a slideshow.
out when you first set up
You know, you want to feel like you can go anywhere. You're not playing House of the Dead.
your headset in the initial setup, and then just set as a global standard for every game? Imposing this standard on developers not only increases people's comfort within VR, but it also makes those crucial first 30 minutes of an experience so much better. The application can hook you rather than asking you a bunch of questions. But there's more on standardization. I was pretty blown away when I first started developing on the Vision Pro. Apple has built an entire standard look
Some people live in New York and can't move around the room. Okay, that's true, actually. I didn't think of like the space constraints.
and feel for every user interface for every app using SwiftUI. Now, the developers can go around that if they want to, but user feedback shows that this standardized UI implementation from operating system to application allows people to spend more time actually using the applications rather than menu diving and being frustrated. And I strongly believe
It's like when you try to like set your height in VR. It's so annoying because if you like mess up your height, like even if you know your height and you pick it, the sensors are still messed up, or you'll be like a midget or a giant.
that Meta or Valve or whichever big company needs to introduce an OS-themed style guide or user interface template, just like how every other platform does out there. 4. Predictability of confirmation. Make navigation easy, satisfying, and predictable. Right now, almost every VR application uses raycasts or laser pointers from the controller, but they have some pretty massive flaws. Depth perception conflicts, shaky hands, weird controller tracking glitches that result in misclicks, and I think the most interesting is what's called the Heisenberg effect of spatial interaction. It's a phenomenon where you're pointing at something with the controller, and in order to interact with that thing, you pull the trigger. This causes a natural response where the wrist slightly pitches vertically, so you end up not actually hitting your target. Now, this is correctable after
That's like recoil before recoil even kicks in. Thank you, John F. Kennedy, for the 8 months.
the fact, but it's rarely done by developers. And when it is done, everyone has their own way of doing it, meaning every application's laser just feels a whole lot different. And this could fall under standardization, but I believe the problem is not with standard lasers, it's with predictability. Even in Meta's core operating system, if I hover over a selection with hand tracking and pinch, the target location is moved because of the gesture, which is really frustrating and it's very unpredictable. Now, Apple, on the other hand, with the Vision Pro, uses an entirely different method for selection and confirmation. Instead of a laser shooting from your controller, the laser shoots from your
I like how I said the Heisenberg effect, and literally every single person is saying Breaking Bad reference. Jesse, Jesse, we did VR, Jesse.
eyes. You look at something and then pinch to interact with it. But that's not perfect either. In fact, the longer I use Vision Pro, the more frustrating it is when the eye tracking doesn't work perfectly. For example, a menu with two options: save this video recording or delete it. There's an internal panic unlike anything I've ever experienced before. Don't look at it, don't look at it, don't look at it. For tens of thousands of years, humans have used their eyes for
Surely it would come up and say, are you sure?
information gathering, not for decision making. And I think we need a more predictable way of confirmation, whether that's reserving decision making to a separate swipe gesture.
Did he intentionally do that at 420? Is that... I feel that's very intentional.
Standardizing raycast, lerp, and Heisenberg confirmation, or introducing an entirely new control method like head gaze and gesture interaction, taking the same core idea of Apple's eye tracking system, but instead of using your eyes for selection, you use an invisible laser shot from your headset. And I think with the correct signifiers and
So you're watching like a YouTube poop? What is that?
back-end systems, you'd be able to interact with most things in VR without the downsides of the alternative. And 5, defining a VROS conceptual model. Right now, I can't really tell you how the Quest OS or Steam VR flows. It's just a collection of menus that I navigate through because I kind of have to.
That one is awful. What is that? Is that the Quest? Or is that Apple?
I have no model for how these things are connected, and when I do
I think that's Apple.
at some point form some model, it ends up breaking because of an update that just rearranges the same thing.
Oh, it's the Quest?
And this
Yeah, that's awful. Like having to scroll down in VR while having to keep still. That's just terrible.
is the most exciting part of this entire guideline. Say what you want about the Apple Vision Pro, it's cool in some ways, it's very flawed in others, but there's one single thing that I think it does perfectly. Let me break it down. I want you to think of a desktop computer. Not today's computer, but instead one from 1977 with no graphical user interface. You have a single application with code exposed, and the interaction method is quite literally a command line. Think of this as the first dimension of human-computer interaction, a line. Now extend that line to the second dimension. Add a graphical user interface, a place to put multiple applications side by side, all fixed on a 2D plane. It's what we have today. This is your desktop, which holds all of your open applications, of which there are a few main types: widgets, windows, and some applications that full screen and take your entire desktop. This is a game or an immersive app. This is the second dimension of the computer-human interface. And this is exactly what the Vision Pro nails. Apple has what they call a shared space, and within that shared
Oh, that's right. It's like you can have different tabs, but they all take up... They're all like aware of each other's space within the actual household.
space, there are distinctly 3 types of applications: flat 2D panels that exist in 3D, volumes,
It's like actual peak brain rot though, just like playing like 5 YouTube videos in a mobile game all at once.
which are 3D applications that just take up a certain user-defined volume, and of course you have your full screen games, your immersive
Thank you, Trapezoid, for joining.
applications that take over your entire shared space. And when you break it down, you realize that the shared space is just a desktop pulled out to the third dimension, and it functions exactly that way. It's not a loose analogy, it's the same exact thing. And I think this is the biggest breakthrough that VR software has ever had: a strong conceptual model.
Brain rot is an overused word. Yeah, it'll probably last another 6 months. It's like the Ohio meme lasted a while, and now people just get laughed at when they say only in Ohio.
That is familiar in all the ways that we already interact with
Did
technology,
you see the
but it
announcement from Sony today? They've renamed their console to Station 5, after realizing there's nothing you can play on it.
Netflix 5, Spotify 5. Thank you, Adam, for the 10. You should play Boneworks for good weighted feel. Oh no, I did play Boneworks a few years ago. Big learning curve, but worth it. Yeah, I did play Boneworks actually. That was alright. It was actually a pretty good game.
amplifies them.
I think I ended up getting to nearly to the end.
And if you've ever operated a desktop computer, you'll intuitively know almost exactly how this works. And again, I don't think it's the eye tracking, and I don't think it's the lack of controllers. I think it's an intuitive, clear model that you don't need to think about because you've already been using it for your entire life.
Part 5. Simulacrum Inspiratio Intuitiva.
So, it may seem a little ridiculous and perhaps unnecessary to go into the detail I did in this video, but I felt absolutely compelled to share some of the concepts that I learned while on this journey, and it's the kind of video that I wished existed. But I
Oh my god, I would love to do driving in VR. That would be crazy.
also went this deep because the world of design is legitimately so fascinating. And I think it's a really powerful feeling to leave the role of the everyone else and to see everything from just a slightly different perspective. And while terms like signifiers or affordances seem like such a mechanical way to think about the world, the funny part is that all of these design terms are really just philosophical concepts that try to explain and guide people to make things that people love. And as we build more and more complex things, we're adding little tiny bits to humanity's collective intuition. And beyond the technical jumbo, I found design to be a beautiful
I can finally drink and drive. I remember when Jay Schlatt did like a series of like him drinking and driving in VR. Because that is actually legal.
poem of analogies that are rooted deeply in our physical world. And these analogies allow us to navigate anything and anywhere. That is, as long as the design is good enough to guide our intuition. And speaking of intuition, throughout all of human history, intuition has actually been this mystical thing. It's like magic. And I'm not surprised. It's immediate knowledge, to know without knowing. And in Plato's Republic, to be touched by intuition is to be touched by the soul of eternity. To feel intuition about something is almost like filling a cup.
I do want to say with this guy who made this video, I feel this guy is too smart for YouTube. He genuinely needs like his own series on like, what's that website that everyone uses? Nebula. He needs like his own series on like Nebula or something. Because I feel like what he's saying and all this stuff is like way too intelligent. And it's almost going into like philosophy territory. What's Nebula? It's a website where like mostly left-wing people upload their content onto. Like exclusive content.
Cup from the well of all of mankind's
The design and graphics in this video are great. Yeah, no, they're phenomenal.
knowledge and to drink from it. And if you take a second to think about it, how do you really know something that you don't know? There are a lot of factors to it. Environment, designs, books, but there's something else out there, our gut. And that's what I find interesting about design. And that's what I find especially interesting about design in virtual reality. It's a kick-ass technology that we legitimately haven't figured out yet. No matter what anybody says, no matter the confidence in my words, nobody really knows anything. And the things we build today to please our intuition are the analogies and skeuomorphisms that will be used tomorrow. And it's not the alien science fiction of Johnny Mnemonic, and it's not the alien nature of today's interfaces. It's instead going to be built off of what humanity already knows. And that is exactly why I find VR so damn cool. But we can do better.
Yeah, that was a really good video. I do think VR is like still a little bit superficial at the minute. Like imagine like we're going to reach the point where doctors can do like surgery in VR, like on people that are thousands of miles away or something.